My daughter-in-law threw my glass of wine to the floor and screamed, "Old nurse, get out of my life!" in front of all her friends. On Monday, I handed her a letter. That made her fall out of her chair. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My daughter-in-law splashed her glass of red wine across my dress and screamed, "Washed up nurse, get out of my life," in front of everyone. The sound of crystals shattering against the marble floor still haunts me. I can still feel the sting of the cold liquid seeping through my dress, the burning shame on my skin. I can still see the dozens of eyes staring at me, some with pity, others with embarrassment. The elegant charity gala at the hospital had come to a standstill, and I was the spectacle. My name is Marie Donovan. I'm 67 years old, and I've spent my entire life caring for others. First as a dedicated nurse for 40 years, then as a supportive mother-in-law, and now as a doting grandmother. But that night, Isabella made it abundantly clear that none of it mattered. "Mom, please," my son Thomas whispered, his eyes pleading with me not to make the scene worse. Not once did he turn to his wife to chastise her behavior. Not once did he stand up for me. I stood there, wine dripping down my silk dress, my hands trembling with emotion. Isabella glared at me, her perfectly made-up face contorted with disgust. This wasn't the first time she had made her feelings known, but it was certainly the most public and humiliating. "I think it's best if you leave, Marie," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're clearly upset, and we wouldn't want you to have one of your senior moments." I don't have senior moments, never have. But Isabella had spent years constructing this narrative about me to Thomas and their friends. That I was unstable, difficult, intrusive, and my son, the brilliant doctor I had raised alone after his father died when he was just 10 years old, believed her. As I gathered my purse and shawl, I caught sight of my grandchildren peering from behind a pillar. 7-year-old Charlotte and 5-year-old Henry watched with wide eyes as their grandmother was humiliated and dismissed like an unwanted servant. What were they learning about respect, about family, about honoring those who came before them? The drive home was a blur of tears and painful memories. I remembered when Thomas first brought Isabella home 5 years ago. She was charming then, fascinated by my nursing stories and complimenting my modest home. The change had been gradual but unmistakable. A cancelled family dinner here, a condescending remark there. Then came the restrictions on when I could see my grandchildren, always with an excuse. They were too busy with activities. Isabella needed private family time without the interruption of in-laws. I pulled into the driveway of the well-maintained house I'd lived in for 40 years. The house where I'd raised Thomas alone, working night shifts and double shifts to ensure he could attend the best schools and eventually medical school. Now he lived in a luxurious apartment in the heart of the city with a wife who despised me for reasons I couldn't fully comprehend. Inside, I sank onto my couch still in my stained dress and let the tears flow freely. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Mom, I'm sorry about tonight. Isabella's just stressed with her design deadlines. Give her some space." Okay, space. That's all I've been giving them. So much space that I was becoming a stranger to my own grandchildren, whom I loved with every fibre of my being. And still, it wasn't enough. I dragged myself to the bathroom and caught sight of my reflection. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed, face drawn with sadness. This wasn't the confident nurse who had saved countless lives, who had stood strong in crisis situations, who had been respected by doctors and patients alike. When had I allowed myself to become this diminished version of myself? When had I started believing that I deserved this treatment? That night, I slept fitfully, dreaming of shattered crystal and cruel voices. In my dreams, I stood up for myself with the same authority I once used in the emergency room. I told Isabella exactly what I thought of her behavior. I reminded Thomas of all the sacrifices I had made for him, but in reality I had simply walked away, head bowed, defeated. Morning brought no relief. I called my best friend Eleanor, who had been trying to tell me for years that Isabella was systematically cutting me out of my family's life. "Marie, enough is enough," Eleanor said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of our 40-year friendship. "You've let that woman walk all over you for too long. When are you going to stand up for yourself like you used to stand up for your patients?" "What can I do, Eleanor? If I confront her, she'll just use it as another excuse to keep me away from the children. So you'll just keep taking her abuse? watching your relationship with your son and grandchildren disappear. Is that your plan? I had no plan. I felt trapped in an impossible situation. Fight back and risk losing what little contact I had with my family or continue to endure Isabella's cruelty. What I didn't know then was that Monday would change everything. Monday, when I would hand Isabella a letter that would make her fall out of her chair. A letter that would finally expose the truth and give me back the dignity I had surrendered piece by piece over the years. But first, I needed to find my courage again. The backbone I once had as a head nurse who managed entire hospital wings. And as I sat at my kitchen table that morning, sipping tea from a chipped mug, I had no idea that courage would find me in the most unexpected place, or that the weapon I needed against Isabella had been in my possession all along. The weekend crawled by in a haze of self-pity and regret. By Sunday afternoon, I couldn't bear to sit alone with my thoughts any longer. I decided to tackle the cluttered study, a project I'd been putting off for years. At least physical labor might distract me from the persistent ache in my heart. The study was stuffy, filled with decades of memories, certificates, and medical journals I'd kept from my nursing career. I started with Thomas's childhood mementos, academic awards, science fair ribbons, and photo albums documenting every milestone. Had Isabella seen these? Did she know how I'd attended every science competition, helped with every research project, worked double shifts to pay for his medical school applications? Hours passed as I sorted through the boxes, reliving moments of pride and sacrifice. My back ached and dust coated my clothes. But the physical discomfort was almost welcome. A different kind of pain to focus on. That's when I found the large manila envelope tucked behind an old filing cabinet. I didn't recognize it at first. The envelope was yellowed with age, the flap sealed with ancient tape. Inside were documents I hadn't thought about in years. The deed to Thomas's apartment. My late husband Richard had purchased that property as an investment shortly before his sudden heart attack. He'd intended to renovate it for rental income, but never got the chance. After his death, I couldn't bear to sell it. It was one of the last decisions he'd made, and somehow keeping it made me feel connected to him. Instead, I'd kept up the property taxes and minimal maintenance, letting it sit vacant for years. When Thomas and Isabella got married, they'd been saving for a place of their own. I remembered the moment clearly, sitting at this very kitchen table, sliding a key across to my son. "It's yours," I had told him, explaining that his father had bought the property years ago. "Consider it an early inheritance and your wedding present." Thomas had been stunned, grateful. Isabella had been ecstatic, already planning the renovations and designer furniture. What I hadn't mentioned, what hadn't seemed important at the time, was that I had never legally transferred the property to Thomas's name. I'd given them the apartment to live in, but the deed still listed me as the owner. I stared at the paperwork, my heart pounding. According to these documents, I still owned the luxury apartment where Thomas and Isabella lived. The apartment Isabella had practically thrown me out of just 2 days ago. I sank onto a dusty chair, my mind racing. Did they know? Had they ever checked the property records? Given Isabella's reaction to my presence, I doubted she realized she was living in a home that legally belonged to me. As I continued digging through the envelope, I found insurance papers, tax records, and the original purchase agreement. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The apartment was still mine. I carried the documents downstairs, spreading them across my kitchen table to examine them properly. There had to be a mistake. Surely I wouldn't have forgotten something so significant. But there was no mistake. I had given Thomas the key, told him the apartment was his. But in the fog of grief following Richard's death, I had never completed the legal transfer. I had simply handed over the keys and let them move in, trusting that we would sort out the paperwork eventually, but we never had. My phone rang, startling me. It was Rebecca, a former colleague who lived in the same building as Thomas and Isabella. "Marie, I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said hesitantly. "Not at all. Is everything okay?" She paused. "I wanted to check on you after what happened at the gala. Word gets around the hospital community, you know." I closed my eyes, humiliation washing over me anew. "I'm fine, Rebecca. Thank you for asking." "There's something else," she said, her voice dropping. "I'm not one to spread gossip, but I thought you should know. I've seen Isabella with someone several times now." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "A man, not Thomas. They meet at that upscale cafe on Elm Street. They seem very close. Yesterday I saw them in his car. They were kissing, Marie. And I've noticed expensive gifts. things I doubt Thomas could afford even on a doctor's salary. The room seemed to tilt. Isabella was cheating on my son, the same woman who had systematically pushed me out of their lives, who had convinced Thomas I was the problem. "Have you told Thomas?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "No, I thought you should know first. And Marie, there's more. I've overheard her on the phone in the lobby talking about money problems. Serious ones." After Rebecca hung up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, surrounded by property documents and this new explosive information. Isabella was cheating on my son. She was living in my apartment, and she had humiliated me in front of the entire hospital community where I had built my reputation over 4 decades. Pieces started falling into place. Isabella's increasing hostility toward me, her determination to cut me out of their lives. What if it wasn't just ordinary mother-in-law tension? What if she was deliberately isolating Thomas from his support system? I needed to confirm Rebecca's story before jumping to conclusions. But combined with the property documents spread before me, I now held information that could completely change the power dynamic between Isabella and me. For the first time since that disastrous charity gala, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. Not quite hope, not quite vindication, but a growing certainty that the universe had just handed me the means to reclaim my dignity and protect my son. Monday was approaching, and with it a decision I never thought I'd have to make. Should I confront Isabella with what I knew? Should I tell Thomas about his wife's betrayal? Or should I simply assert my legal rights to the apartment they lived in? As the sun set outside my window, I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the victim in Isabella's story. It was time for me to write my own ending, with the same strength I once showed in the emergency room. That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with possibilities and consequences. By morning, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. But a strange clarity had emerged. I called Eleanor. "I need your advice," I said when she answered. "Can you come over?" An hour later, we sat at my kitchen table, the property documents, and a pot of strong coffee between us. Eleanor listened without interruption as I explained everything. The apartment, Rebecca's revelation about Isabella's affair and financial troubles, my growing suspicion that Isabella was systematically isolating my son. When I finished, Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I've been waiting 5 years for you to see what that woman really is. I should have listened to you sooner," I admitted, feeling the weight of lost time. "The question is, what are you going to do now?" Eleanor asked, tapping the property deed. "You have options, Marie. Real power." Did I? The thought was so foreign after years of yielding to Isabella's hostility, stepping back to keep the peace, making myself smaller to accommodate her demands. "I could tell Thomas about the affair," I said quietly. Eleanor frowned. "And what if he doesn't believe you? Isabella's had years to poison him against you. He might think you're making it up out of spite." She was right. Isabella had skillfully positioned me as the jealous, clingy mother who couldn't let go. Any accusation from me would be filtered through that lens. "Or," Eleanor continued, "you could use the apartment legally. You could evict them." I recoiled at the thought. I would never do that to Thomas or my grandchildren. Of course not. But Isabella doesn't know that. I stared at my oldest friend, seeing the strategic mind that had made her a formidable hospital administrator before retirement. "You think I should threaten her?" "I think you should let her know that you know about everything. The affair, the apartment, the financial troubles. Let her realize that the power dynamic has shifted." Eleanor's eyes gleamed. Watch her squirm for a change. The idea was tempting, so tempting that it frightened me. Was I really considering such calculated retaliation? But wasn't that precisely what Isabella had been doing to me for years? "I don't want revenge," I said finally. "I just want to protect my son and my grandchildren. And maybe to get back a little of what she's taken from me." Eleanor nodded. "Then you need evidence of the affair. Something concrete that Thomas can't dismiss. And then what? Break my son's heart, destroy his family?" "Isabella's already doing that," Eleanor said bluntly. "You'd just be opening his eyes to the truth." After Eleanor left, I sat alone weighing my options. The thought of confronting Isabella made my stomach clench with anxiety. She was younger, more confident, quicker with cutting remarks. But she had also never seen me fight back. I spent the afternoon driving past the cafe on Elm Street, where Rebecca had seen Isabella with her lover. Fortune favored me. There they were, sitting at an outdoor table, their hands intertwined. I parked a safe distance away and used my phone to take pictures. Isabella looked animated, happy, her face lit with an ease I'd never seen when she was with Thomas. The man was handsome in a polished way, expensive haircut, designer clothes, and they were reviewing what looked like financial documents. They seemed comfortable together, familiar. This was clearly not a new development. I followed at a distance when they left the cafe. They walked to a sleek car parked on a quiet side street. Before getting in, Isabella glanced around furtively, then leaned in for a passionate kiss. I captured it all on my phone, feeling sick but determined. They drove to a boutique hotel in the heart of downtown. I didn't follow further. I didn't need to. By evening, I knew what I had to do. Not for revenge, not for satisfaction, but because my son deserved the truth. And because I deserved to reclaim my dignity. I sat at my desk and began to write, the words flowing with the clarity I once used for critical patient reports. Isabella, I want you to know 3 things. First, the apartment you live in, the apartment you threw me out of, legally belongs to me. I never transferred the deed to Thomas's name. Enclosed are copies of the relevant documents. Second, I know about your affair. I know about the man you meet at the cafe on Elm Street, about your trips to the Grand Hotel. I have photographic evidence also enclosed. I'm also aware of your financial difficulties. Third, I love my son and my grandchildren more than anything in this world. I've stepped back, stayed silent, and endured your cruelty because I feared losing them entirely. That ends now. I don't want to hurt Thomas. I don't want to devastate my grandchildren. But I will not allow you to continue destroying our family while living under my roof. You have a choice: end the affair immediately and start treating me with the basic respect any human being deserves. Or I will tell Thomas everything and begin formal eviction proceedings. I'm not asking to be your best friend. I'm simply requiring decency for myself and for the sake of my son who deserves better than betrayal. You have until Friday to decide. Marie? I read the letter over, feeling a strange calm. The words weren't vindictive or emotional, just clear, factual, firm. I enclosed copies of the property documents and printed several of the photos I'd taken. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow I would hand Isabella this letter that would make her fall out of her chair. Tomorrow everything would change. For the first time in years, I slept soundly, undisturbed by fears of disapproval or rejection. Whatever happened next, I would face it standing tall, with the same courage I had shown throughout my nursing career. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I dressed carefully, a simple navy blue dress that Eleanor always said brought out my eyes, comfortable but elegant flats, a touch of makeup, not for Isabella's benefit but for my own. Today I needed every ounce of confidence I could muster. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter, sealed and waiting. Inside were the truths that could shatter the careful facade Isabella had constructed. The proof of her affair. The documents showing that I owned the apartment she had made into her fortress against me. I checked the time. Thomas would be at the hospital. He always left by 700 for morning rounds. The children would be at school. Isabella typically spent Monday mornings at home catching up on her design work before meeting clients for lunch. It was the perfect opportunity. As I drove to their apartment building, my resolve wavered. Was I really prepared to upend everyone's lives? What if this made things worse? What if Thomas blamed me for being the messenger rather than Isabella for her betrayal? No, I said aloud, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I can't keep living like this. I didn't spend 40 years caring for others to be treated this way. The apartment building, my property, legally speaking, came into view. The modern glass structure gleamed in the morning sunlight. Even from the outside, it looked like the perfect home for the perfect family. But I knew better now. I parked in the visitor's space, took a deep breath, and walked through the elegant lobby to the elevator. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted with consequences. I rang the doorbell and waited, heart pounding. After a moment, I heard footsteps approaching. The door swung open and there stood Isabella, perfectly put together as always, in designer jeans and a silk blouse. Her expression shifted instantly from neutral to cold annoyance. "Marie," she said flatly, "Thomas is at the hospital." "I know," I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I came to see you." She raised an eyebrow, making no move to invite me in. "I thought I made it clear on Friday that we needed space." "You made a lot of things clear on Friday," I said. "May I come in? This won't take long." Isabella hesitated, then stepped back grudgingly. 5 minutes. I have client presentations to prepare. I followed her into the living room, the same room where we'd had countless tense interactions. The physical evidence of our last confrontation was gone. No wine stains, no shattered glass, but the emotional tension remained, thick in the air between us. Well? Isabella crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently. What's so important? I held out the envelope. This is for you. She looked at it suspiciously. What is it? Something you need to see. With obvious reluctance, Isabella took the envelope and tore it open. Her eyes scanned the first page of my letter, widening slightly. Then she flipped to the property documents, her fingers tensing around the paper. When she reached the photographs, her face drained of colour. She looked up at me, then back at the photos, then at the deed. Her legs seemed to give out as she sank into the nearest chair. The papers clutched in her trembling hands. This is absurd, she stammered. But the panic in her eyes betrayed her. These photos are. They don't show anything, and this paperwork must be outdated. The photos show exactly what they appear to show, I said calmly with the same tone I once used to deliver difficult news to patients' families. And the property records are current. I checked with the county office yesterday. Isabella's composure cracked further. You had no right to spy on me. And you had no right to treat me the way you have for years, I countered. To isolate my son from me, to limit my time with my grandchildren, to humiliate me in front of my former colleagues at the hospital. Your apartment? Her voice rose shrilly. This is our home. Thomas's and mine, Thomas, and you have been living here because I allowed it. I interrupted. I gave him the key as a wedding present. But I never legally transferred ownership. An oversight on my part, but a fortunate one, as it turns out. Isabella stood suddenly, her face flushing with anger. This is blackmail. No, I said evenly. This is a boundary. This is me standing up for myself after years of your cruelty. You wouldn't dare tell Thomas, she hissed. It would destroy him. Is that what you want? To hurt your precious son? I met her gaze steadily. I don't want to hurt anyone. That's why I'm giving you a choice. End the affair. Treat me with basic respect, or face the consequences of your actions. Isabella's eyes narrowed to slits. You think you've won, don't you? You think you can waltz in here with your threats and your so-called evidence and suddenly have power over me? This isn't about winning, Isabella. It's about truth. It's about my family. Yes, my family, including my son and my grandchildren, and my place in it. She threw the papers onto the coffee table, her hands shaking with rage. Get out of my apartment. My apartment, I corrected gently, turning toward the door. You have until Friday to decide what happens next. As I walked out, I felt lighter than I had in years. Despite the tension of the confrontation, I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't lost control. I had simply spoken my truth and set my terms with the same professionalism I had shown throughout my nursing career. From the car, I glanced back at the building. Isabella stood in the window watching me, her expression unreadable from this distance. I had no idea what she would choose to do next. End the affair, agree to my terms, or call my bluff. But for the first time in our 5-year relationship, the choice wasn't entirely hers. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, realizing that I was no longer afraid. Whatever happened next, I had reclaimed something essential. My voice, my self-respect. I expected to have until Friday before hearing from Isabella or Thomas. I was wrong. By Tuesday evening, my phone was ringing constantly. First Isabella, then Thomas, then Isabella again. I let each call go to voicemail, needing time to steady myself before the inevitable confrontation. Isabella's message was venomous. You've made a terrible mistake, Marie. You have no idea what you've done. Thomas's was confused, worried. Mom, what's going on? Isabella is upset. She says you threatened her. Please call me back. I took a deep breath and called my son. Thomas, I think we need to talk in person. Mom, whatever is happening between you and Isabella, can't you just apologize? She's really upset. Something in me snapped. No, Thomas, not this time. This is important. Can you meet me at Riverfront Cafe in an hour? He hesitated. All right, but Mom, please let's resolve this peacefully. The cafe was quiet in the early evening. Just a few patrons enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. I sat at a table overlooking the river, watching the water flow steadily past. There was comfort in that constancy. The river had been here long before my problems and would continue long after. Thomas arrived looking harried, his tie loosened, hair slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. A nervous habit from childhood, one I recognized from long nights helping him study for medical exams. Mom, he said, sitting beside me. What's this about? Isabella says you're threatening to evict us. I turned to face him, my heart aching at the worry in his eyes. Thomas, there are things you need to know, things I should have told you sooner. Slowly, carefully, I explained about the apartment, how it had remained in my name all these years through oversight, not intention. Thomas looked shocked but not angry. Why didn't you say something before? He asked. Honestly, I forgot. After giving you the key, in my mind it was your apartment. I only discovered the truth when I was cleaning my study this weekend. Thomas nodded slowly. We can fix that. I'll call our lawyer tomorrow and have the deed transferred properly. I took a deep breath. There's more, Thomas. His face fell. Mom, please? If this is about Isabella's behavior at the charity gala, she's stressed with... Isabella is having an affair, I said quietly. And I believe she's in some kind of financial trouble. Thomas froze, his face draining of color. What? I reached for his hand. I'm so sorry. I wouldn't tell you this if I wasn't certain. You're wrong, he said, pulling his hand away. Isabella wouldn't. She loves me. She loves our family. Thomas, I said gently, retrieving my phone. I have proof. I showed him the photos. Isabella with her lover at the cafe. Their passionate kiss by the car. Entering the hotel together. The financial documents they were reviewing. With each image, Thomas's expression crumbled further. No, he whispered. No, this can't be. I'm sorry, I said again, feeling his pain like a physical wound. I didn't want to hurt you, but you deserve to know the truth. He stood abruptly, pacing beside our table. How long have you known? Just since Sunday. A colleague saw them together and told me. Thomas ran his hands through his hair, his breathing ragged. And the eviction threat, was that real or just to scare her? I would never put you and the children on the street, I said firmly. Never. But Isabella didn't know that. I wanted her to understand that things had to change, that I wouldn't be treated like a disposable relative in my own family anymore. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the river. All these years, he said finally, Isabella told me you were trying to come between us, that you were clingy, possessive, that your feelings were always hurt because you couldn't accept that I had my own life. My throat tightened. And you believed her? She was my wife, he said simply, then corrected himself. She is my wife. I tried so hard, Thomas. I stepped back. I made myself small. I accepted the scraps of time she allowed me with you and the children, all to keep the peace. Thomas turned to face me, his eyes red-rimmed. I should have seen it. I should have stood up for you. We both made mistakes, I said, but it's not too late to fix them. What am I going to do? He asked, suddenly looking like the lost boy who'd faced his father's death all those years ago. The children. You're going to take some time to think, I said gently. You're going to decide what's best for you and Charlotte and Henry. And whatever you decide, I'll support you. She's going to say you're lying. That you've always been jealous of her. I nodded. Probably. That's why I made copies of everything. The photos, the property documents. She can deny it, but the truth is the truth. Thomas sank back onto his chair, shoulders slumped. I need to confront her. Do you want me to come with you? He considered this, then shook his head. No, this is between me and Isabella. But afterward, his voice faltered. Afterward, I might need a place to stay with the kids. You know you're always welcome, I said, my heart both breaking for his pain and swelling with hope that my son might finally see me for who I truly am again. As dusk settled over the cafe, Thomas and I sat in silence watching the river flow. The confrontation with Isabella still loomed ahead. But something fundamental had already shifted. For the first time in years, my son and I were on the same side, facing the truth together instead of divided by Isabella's manipulations. Whatever happened next, we would face it as a family. The real family that had existed long before Isabella entered our lives. 6 months can change everything. On a warm Saturday morning, I stood in my kitchen preparing breakfast. Pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. A weekend tradition that had recently been reinstated. Upstairs, I could hear the patter of small feet and excited whispers as Charlotte and Henry awakened. Grandma, is breakfast ready? Charlotte called down the stairs, her voice carrying through the house. My house, which now held more love and laughter than it had in decades. Almost ready, sweetheart. Tell your daddy to bring you down. So much had changed since that fateful day when I'd handed Isabella the letter. The confrontation between her and Thomas had been explosive, according to my son. Isabella had denied everything at first, then shifted to blame. It was Thomas's fault for being emotionally distant. My fault for turning him against her, society's fault for not understanding her needs. But faced with the undeniable evidence of her affair and financial deceptions, her defenses had eventually crumbled. The woman who had seemed so invincible, so cruelly confident, had revealed herself to be a house of cards, fragile, insecure, built on lies. Thomas and the children had moved in with me the very next day, bringing only what they could carry in. A few hastily packed suitcases. Isabella had been apoplectic, threatening lawsuits, custody battles, even physical violence. But when Thomas's lawyer, not mine, as I'd insisted this remained primarily between them, had presented the property documents along with the evidence of infidelity, her position had weakened considerably. The divorce proceedings had been difficult, especially for the children. Charlotte, at 7, understood enough to know that her mother had done something that hurt her father deeply. Henry, at 5, simply couldn't comprehend why his family had shattered overnight. I'd done my best to provide stability during those turbulent months, drawing on all my years of helping patients through crisis. My modest house became a refuge, not just for Thomas and the children, but for me as well. After years of being pushed to the margins of my family's life, I was suddenly central again, needed again. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway, a child clinging to each hand. "Good morning, Mom. Something smells amazing." "Dinosaur pancakes!" Henry exclaimed, eyes wide with anticipation. I smiled, flipping a triceratops-shaped pancake onto a waiting plate. "Who wants the first one?" Me! Both children shouted, scrambling onto the chairs I'd placed booster seats on. As I served breakfast, I marveled at how natural this felt. Having my family around my table, starting the day together, building new routines and traditions. It wasn't the future I had envisioned, certainly not one that came without pain, but it was real and precious nonetheless. Thomas caught my eye over the children's heads and smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, unlike the strained expressions I'd grown accustomed to during his marriage. "Thanks for everything, Mom. I don't know how we would have gotten through this without you." "That's what family does," I said simply. "We show up for each other." I learned that in 40 years of nursing, and I've never forgotten it. After breakfast, while Thomas helped the children get dressed, I checked my email. Among the usual messages was one that made my heart skip. Confirmation that the property transfer was complete. I had officially signed over my apartment, to Thomas. It had been my decision, made after months of careful thought. The apartment held too many painful memories for all of us now, tainted by Isabella's betrayal. More importantly, it had become clear that Thomas needed a fresh start. A home that was truly his, without Isabella's influence or my history. The sale had closed yesterday. Thomas didn't know yet. I'd tell him today, show him the papers making him the sole legal owner. It was time for him to rebuild his life on his own terms in a space that belonged entirely to him. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Thomas appeared in the hallway, confusion on his face. "Are we expecting someone?" I shook my head. "I'll get it." Opening the front door, I found Isabella standing on my porch, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman who had once thrown wine in my face. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a plain sweater. "Marie," she said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "May I come in?" I hesitated, protective instincts flaring. "Isabella, I don't think that's—" "Please," she interrupted, "just for a minute. I need to say something." Behind me, I heard Thomas's sharp intake of breath as he recognized his ex-wife's voice. "Mom, it's okay." "Let her in." Isabella stepped into the hallway, her eyes darting nervously to Thomas, then back to me. "I won't stay long. She took a deep breath. I came to apologize. Of all the things I had expected from Isabella, an apology had never been among them. "These past months, I've had a lot of time to think," she continued. "The divorce, losing custody." Her voice faltered. "I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I did the things I did." Thomas crossed his arms. And I was wrong," Isabella said simply. "I was insecure, jealous of your relationship with your mother, of your success as a doctor when my design business was failing. I convinced myself she was trying to control our lives when really I was the one doing the controlling." She turned to me. "Marie, I treated you terribly. The things I said, the way I isolated you from Thomas and the children, there's no excuse. I'm truly sorry." I searched her face for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas, but found only genuine remorse. This wasn't the Isabella I had known. Or perhaps it was an Isabella I had never been allowed to know. Thank you for saying that, I said carefully. It means a lot to hear. The children are upstairs, Thomas said. They're almost ready for the park. Would you like to see them before we go? Isabella's eyes filled with tears. I would very much. As she climbed the stairs to greet her children, Thomas turned to me. Do you think she's sincere? I considered the question, drawing on decades of reading people in crisis. Yes, I do. People can change, Thomas. Sometimes they just need a wake-up call. Later that day, after Isabella had gone and the children were napping, exhausted from their morning at the park, I showed Thomas the property transfer documents. Mom, I can't accept this. You can and you will, I said firmly. It's time for you and the children to have your own home again. A fresh start. Thomas embraced me, his voice thick with emotion. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything good, Thomas. You always have. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The pain of that charity gala, the shock of discovering the truth about Isabella, the courage it had taken to write that letter. All of it had led to this moment of peace. I had never wanted revenge. I had only wanted what everyone deserves: respect, love, and a place in my family. In standing up for myself, I had not only reclaimed my dignity, but had also helped my son see the truth he had been blind to for too long. The future was uncertain. Thomas and the children would eventually move back into their own home. Isabella would remain part of our lives through the children. Healing would take time for all of us, but as I watched the golden light fade from the sky, I felt a profound gratitude. The glass Isabella had shattered that night had been destroyed beyond repair. But my family, my real family, had not. We had pieced ourselves back together, stronger at the broken places, ready to begin again. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you.